So good morning, everyone. We'll continue now. So there is no chair of this panel, or if you want, there are 3 chairs. So we'll just divide the work among us. I'm Pavel Salai. I head the Prague office of Reporters Without Borders, and I'm very honored to give a speech today at the Ratu Democracy Center. I will start with a quote. The power structure with Moscow at its apex has once again demonstrated its ruthless determination to snuff out any attempt at freedom of expression. On behalf of the International Federation of Free Journalists, uniting journalists of Central and Eastern European origin now working in the free world, we vehemently protest against this new patent use of force whose first victim in unhappy Czechoslovakia is the slender flower of press freedom only recently born under Dubček's regime. Jon Ratu, chairman of the International Federation of Free Journalists, on 21st of August, 1968. The world doesn't seem to have made much progress since 21st of August, 1968, the day of the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Warsaw Pact. The invasion killed not only 108 civilians, but also any chance for democracy. We still live in a world where civilians and journalists are being killed in cold blood. In the past 10 years, 4 journalists have been assassinated in the European Union, including Jan Kuciak in my own country, Slovakia. Since 2022, the Russian army has killed 16 journalists, covering its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Nearly 220 Israeli journalists, 65 of them on duty, were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. And in none of these cases, full justice has been served. At the same time, we face another, more insidious threat, the slander of media freedom. From Vladimir Putin to Viktor Orban, from Alexander Vucic to Donald Trump, authoritarians are forcing journalism into political submission through abusive lawsuits, economic pressure, enforced self-censorship, and in some cases, exile. Even when media survive political pressure, they are vulnerable to hostile takeovers by oligarchs aligned with anti-press politicians. And this is not limited to countries at the bottom of the World Press Freedom Index of RSF. It also affects countries ranked higher, those that host exiled journalists, such as Czech Republic, France, or Lithuania. And when media manage to remain free and independent, they face yet another threat: arbitrary algorithms. Today, the rules of the game for journalism are largely set by the digital platforms, social networks, and search engines. In a snap of fingers, Meta, X, or Google can delete media content, cut traffic, and drain advertising revenue. Trustworthy information is replaced by propaganda. Media content is manipulated through artificial intelligence. Journalists are harassed online and discredited by deepfakes. Russian propaganda in Europe thrives. Authoritarians and oligarchs play along while claiming to defend free speech and free market. And so the vicious circle continues. We heard many concrete examples of this yesterday and today. As Czechoslovak dissident and President Václav Havel, who was also my president, because I was born Czechoslovak, so as Václav Havel said, the inherent disadvantage of democracy is that it ties the hands of those who take it seriously and act in good faith, while it allows almost anything to those who do not take it seriously. Our hands may be tied, but our feet are not, and democracy allows almost everything, not everything. And this is where we act. Last October at Forum 2000, the human rights conference founded by Václav Havel, Reporters Without Borders inaugurated its Prague office, our first in Central and Eastern Europe. Because we believe that the fight for press freedom in Europe must be fought here, in the eastern flank of Europe. Take Hungary. Viktor Orban's victory in the upcoming April 12th election would embolden his followers across Europe and even in the United States. His defeat would weaken them. One reason why Orban is under pressure today is the withholding of EU funds over rule of law violations. Recently, the Court of Justice of the EU condemned Hungary for arbitrarily refusing to renew the license of the independent broadcaster Club Radio. If the license is not restored, even more funds of the EU will be withheld. When I met Club Radio's CEO in Budapest earlier this week, he told me that being pushed off the air forced them into the digital era, and that they have survived thanks to small donations. Hungary still has a small but resilient independent media sector sustained by the civil society's demand. Resistance is also possible in the United States, and I'm optimistic, a little bit optimistic, like John here. Exactly 1 year ago, RSF took the US government to court for the first time in its 40-year history. Together with partners, we filed a lawsuit to protect Voice of America against dismantling. Earlier this month, a federal judge ruled that Kari Lake had been unlawfully appointed as acting CEO of the US Agency for Global Media, the agency that manages Voice of America, invalidating many of her actions, including the mass dismissal of VOA journalists. And just this week, another ruling ordered that Voice of America staff must return to work and that broadcasting must resume. Meanwhile, a bipartisan vote in Congress restored funding for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. As for Vladimir Putin, Reporters Without Borders has filed 11 complaints with the International Criminal Court, seeking his prosecution for crimes against journalists in Ukraine, just as Yugoslav officials were once judged in The Hague. But we are not waiting for justice. We are already helping Russian exiled and European media circumvent the censorship in Russia. In 2024, with the EU's support, RSF launched the satellite package, Svoboda, providing access to independent Russian language media, including ECO, so the former ECO of Moscow, Radio Free Europe, Deutsche Welle, and TV8 Moldova, to 4.5 million households in Russia and 800,000 households in occupied territories of Ukraine. The goal is not only to provide access to independent journalism, but to reverse the logic of disinformation. We counter Russian propaganda experts by broadcasting trustworthy journalism deeply into the authoritarian territory. When European and exiled Russian media are banned, we'll include them in our collateral freedom program, mirroring their websites to keep them accessible inside Russia. Digital platforms are not all the same. In Czech Republic, we partnered with Seznam, one of the few European competitors to Google. It has recently launched a social network based on a radically different model, one that places trustworthy journalism at the center, not at its margins. Last month, RSF and Seznam announced that RSF's Journalism Trust Initiative certification is now part of the criteria for inclusion in Seznam's newsfeed. This is the first website, the most visited website in Czech Republic. Let me pause here on one key issue, trust. Yesterday, Sandra Pralong said that journalism must convince people that truth is real. I believe JTI helps achieve that. Recognized today by the European Media Freedom Act, JTI was developed in 2019 as an international standard by around 130 experts from media, regulators, associations, and platforms. It defines criteria for transparency, independence, and ethics across all types of news outlets. Today, JTI is used by more than 2,400 media outlets in 127 countries, including Romania's Press One, Snoop, Rice Project, the regional media Atlas to Erdeli and Monitorul de Botoșani, as well as Moldova's Ziarul de Garda. JTI allows media to be recognized as trustworthy by donors, advertisers, public, and authorities. It shows that journalism is not about personalities, but about processes, as Rebecca Shah pointed out yesterday. In the European Union, we advocate for legislation that requires platforms to promote trustworthy journalism and that obliges them to finance journalism through taxes on their turnover. Our other hot battle is artificial intelligence. Here too we are working on both ethics and technology. From the Paris Charter on AI in Journalism, drafted by a commission under the leadership of Nobel laureate Maria Ressa, to Spinoza, our prototype AI tool designed for journalists. Defeating hostile algorithms may seem distant, unrealistic, but we remain hopeful. As Václav Havel said, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Havel himself was the embodiment of resilient civil society long before these terms became fashionable. Our pessimism often comes from focusing only on politics. In Slovakia, under Prime Minister Robert Fico, whom RSF listed as a press freedom predator last year, independent media continue to thrive thanks to strong public demand. After expanding into Czech Republic, the Slovak outlet Deník N recently acquired the Brussels-based EU affairs media EU Observer. Deník N was founded in 2014 by journalists who left the daily SME after its hostile takeover by an oligarch. It is funded primarily by online subscription. In fact, thanks to the wisdom of SME's co-owners and the courage of its journalists, its newsroom remained independent. Instead of destroying the independent media they bought, the oligarchs triggered the creation of a new one. The story of Romania's Recorder, funded on 90% by donations, is also inspiring. In France, RSF is now working to counter hostile media concentration using new legal tools provided by the European Media Freedom Act. But private outlets cannot replace public service media, which speak to the whole society. Despite new safeguards, most public broadcasters in the EU remain under pressure. Yet citizens are not giving up, and neither should we. Yesterday, while we were here, 250,000 people protested in Prague against the plans to undermine the independence of the public media, the largest protest in Czechia since 2019. Earlier this month, Swiss voters rejected a drastic cut to the license fee. And last December, the Lithuanians defended their public broadcaster LRT in the largest protest in decades. Journalism and democracy may be dying, but they are not yet dead. We may not win this battle, but we will never know unless we fight it. Like our adversaries, we have powerful tools, one of them being the European Media Freedom Act, in force since August 2025. Ensuring its enforcement is one of the main missions of RSF's Prague Bureau. And we are ready to cooperate with any organization which shares our values and with any politician who shows the slightest good political will. Authoritarians, algorithms, and oligarchs spread lies and hate journalism. They have power, but we have the truth. We have legal tools, ideas, and a critical part of the society on our side. As Václav Havel said, truth and love must prevail over lies and hatred. Thank you.
Okay, I will take over from here. My name is Răzvan Martin. I'm working with ActiveWatch, which is a media freedom NGO from Bucharest. We've been working to defend journalists, to advocate press freedom for over 25 years. And first of all, I want to thank our hosts for inviting us. We're very honored to be here. And as I attended the previous panels, I realized that the what I prepared for today was mostly covered by the debates that have taken place. So it's more of a theoretical, of an abstract theoretical roundup of what was discussed. The title of our panel is quite depressing, of course, the death of journalism. The bleak perspective that we are going through, I think not since, as Mr. Florescu said, since the last 2 or 3 years, but the year that I consider to be the threshold of this I don't know how to describe it, this chaotic new political media scene is 2016 with the Brexit and Google Analytica and the first Trump win and the coup, the failed coup d'etat against Erdogan. So I would say journalism is certainly not dying. I think at least in Romania, independent quality journalism is thriving, because I want to start and end in an optimist note. But journalism is transforming under the new circumstances, under new political context, under new technologies at its hands, and under the eternal political and economical pressure. And of course, the big platforms which have surged and are dominating the market are the new actors, the new elephants in the room that leave little breathing space sometimes for journalists, for quality information, and for access to quality information for the public. How to save media from authoritarians, oligarchs, and algorithms. Over 20 years ago, when I started working with our organization, and Romania was run by a government obsessed with controlling information, we were thinking and heading towards a sort of authoritarian regime. Our hopes were that the internet and the online media are the answers for press freedom, for independent media. Of course, it was the beginning of internet, of online media, and we're full of naive optimism. How to save the media from oligarchs? That was another thing that we dealt with later, when the media landscape in Romania became dominated by oligarchs, by local oligarchs, and we baptized the phenomenon Berlusconization of the media, when powerful businessmen, who many of them became politicians, took control of media outlets, and most of them created big media groups, very influent on the market and on the political scene as well. And we used to believe that pluralism, diversity, crowdfunding, subscriptions, paid content, public service media, online media are the answers to resist this process of media Berlusconization. But now we are trapped, because we are in an environment where we are witnessing this merger, blessed also by the dominant ideology, a merger between authoritarians, oligarchs, and the patrons of algorithms. And these patrons of algorithms, these new people in the market, new already at least 10, 15 years, in their turn, to make things hopeless, are both oligarchs and authoritarian, and most of them have an open disdain of democracy. And it was already mentioned here the name of the Allison family, Peter Thiel, and the others. So I don't want to go into that. So we're facing, press freedom is facing new threats and new enemies. Uh, until recently, press enemies were predominantly, at least in Romania, internal actors, politicians, businessmen, media owners, local authorities, public authorities. Nowadays, the main threats come from abroad, from big platforms or from state actors. What happened in 2024 during the elections showed that the Romanian state, not necessarily the Romanian media, but the state and we as a society are vulnerable to attacks from a state actor. Former advocates of media freedom have become adversaries. And of course, I'm mentioning here the US government, who until 10 years ago was an institution, I would say, on which we could always count whenever big abuses against press freedom, against journalists took place in Romania. We knew that if we reported the case to the US Embassy, soon there would be a reaction and the Romanian authorities usually would comply. It was the same with the EU until 2007 when Romania joined the EU. The process of accession meant that Romania had to comply to basic human rights standards. So whenever there were serious threats, the EU would react, and Romanian authorities, not because they were understanding the magnitude of the problem, but out of self-interest, they had to comply. Now we don't have these leverages anymore, and to make it even worse, of course, the US government is now representing actually the interests of these platforms, which often come into conflict with media freedom, with independent media. So we are in a situation, I think, when the tech oligarchs control access to information, not only in Romania, but almost everywhere. And unlike previous waves of capitalism, this techno or tech capitalism, tech feudalism, as Varoufakis calls it, has at its core the ownership of technology. It's not like I forgot, like Rockefellers or JP Morgans who controlled other businesses that were more or less connected to our democratic process. But the oligarchs controlling the technology, they control technology which controls how information is delivered and consumed by the public. So media are left with freedom of production of information, but this is dependent on delivery and consumption. And delivery and consumption are shaped by algorithms controlled by these tech oligarchs. So this is a kind of equation where it's difficult to escape from, and I think that regulations such as DSA, because yesterday there was a discussion started about regulations, and I think there are regulations in place at least at the EU level, and DSA could be a useful instrument, but it's probably too recently adopted, and it will take time and political will and resources to turn it into a functional mechanism. So we are witnessing a situation in which media freedom has more powerful enemies. It's a switch from a media controlled by businessmen, politicians as a platform for promoting their interests or as a leverage tool to a media manipulated by corporations, political actors, or by states to destabilize societies, institutions, democratic mechanisms, and even states. So it's no longer just media used to, I don't know, for slow-term political machinations or for business interests to gain contracts, or it's the threat that we are facing is far, far bigger, and it affects directly the democratic process. And worse than that, it is often used to incite distrust, division, and hate. And this new morphism of manipulation has at its core, as the source of its discourse or narrative, but also as its objective, the construction and exploitation of the faults within society, faults around essential themes to both the social process and the social cohesion. And I was trying to make a parallel with Walter Lippmann's and Noam Chomsky concept of manufacturing consent. And I think we're in a situation when we're witnessing the manufacturing of dissent. It's no longer that they're trying to build consent under for some purposes. The main purpose is to implode trust and to create confusion and chaos in societies. So access, as an effect, it's access to public interest information that is endangered, as we are going through a phase in which the right to freedom of expression through what it used to be blunt censorship, I don't see it as the main purpose or the target or threat now. Because they don't even need to do that. It is the citizens' right to access public interest information that is affected through the confusion, distrust, the flooding of the market with junk information, with the AI produced information, and so on. Of course, we are still witnessing censorship in Romania and everywhere, but they got more sophisticated. They no longer need to apply to such brutal measures. The challenge: how to keep journalism relevant and sustainable in this era of information overflow, algorithms, influencers, and disinformation, and how to watch for the watchdog, how to create a protective environment for independent media and for press freedom. I don't have many answers or solutions, but I think the main purpose is strengthening the role of journalism as gatekeeper and as a watchdog. And this could be done through public funding for independent journalism. And I think we should no longer avoid the state as a funder as a potentially dangerous solution. We need to work probably with public institutions to work together in designing mechanisms of financing the independent media. We need media literacy programs, but really within the education system from early ages. We need to build opportunities. Media should build on the opportunities actually which the new technologies offer to journalism. And we need to strengthen independent, competent public institutions in order to defend public interest and democracy. And as a last thing, yesterday it was the discussion about the golden era of journalism. And I want to say, as a witness for 36 years, since January 1990, as a obsessive compulsive media consumer, that despite all the problems, we are truly living a golden era of independent journalism in Romania. Um, the level of quality and the amount of quality journalism, I think, is unprecedented and is something to be cherished and applauded and encouraged and financed. There is a challenge. There is a challenge to make it, of course, more relevant to broader audiences and also to reinstate trust in independent journalism. In the 90s, journalism was trusted and relevant, um, despite suffering the normal structural or endemic problems of infancy. We were just learning how to experience freedom and to experience freedom of expression and to create media. So it was normal that the level of journalism was not at the standards that we would expect today, but it was a journalism that was extremely trusted, relevant, and people were consuming frenetically journalism. Now we have excellent quality. The challenge is to make it more accessible to wider audiences. Thank you.
So I'm Liana. I'm Răzvan's colleague. I also work. I also work with. We also work with Pavel and RSF. We work with RSF for 20 years, more than yes, and also other press freedom organizations in Europe. And today I'm going to talk about how not to save the media from authoritarian oligarchs and algorithms, because I think we also need to talk about how not to do it. And one important issue is that of using bad legislation and practices in attempting to save the media from either state interference, foreign state interference, or bad oligarchs. Okay, there are no good oligarchs. Anyways, or algorithms. And one problem that I'm going to use a lot of Romanian references in this presentation, because it's obviously a lot easier for me. I know them very well. One problem that we face here in Romania, especially now after the annulled elections, there's this frenzy of countering disinformation, actually not countering, forbidding disinformation, clearing the internet of disinformation, controlling the online expression especially. And one way the state is doing this, the state authorities are doing this, is that they adopt legislation that is limiting legitimate expression. I'm going to give a very simple example, and it might not seem big, but at least in my opinion and other digital rights activists, it is. We have a licensing requirement for online audiovisual media, meaning that any audiovisual media that wants to start, I don't know, a podcast or something on any of the social networks or online, have to submit submit paperwork to the National Council of Audiovisual prior to the moment they start producing media content. It might not seem much, but it's actually similar to a licensing process. In our opinion, it should happen after you start broadcasting or after you start producing this type of content. It's it didn't have any big consequences till now, but it might have in the future. We could also discuss about other type of don't misunderstand me. We are for regulation, of course, and we do believe that the National Council of Audiovisual should regulate this type of media content, obviously, but we do not believe in a licensing procedure, a procedure similar to licensing for such online media. Of course, if we talk about bad legislation, we could also talk about the minor access to social networks. We don't have such a legislation yet, and it's very controversial, and I don't want to start an argument on this topic because it's a very complicated topic. But it is something that we have to have in mind. Minors also have a right to freedom of expression and to access to information, so we will need to balance these issues. Overregulation is another trap, another bad type of legislation and practice. And in the Romanian case, for example, the National Council of Audiovisual, which is the audiovisual regulator, is applying audiovisual legislation to all users. So not only to media users, not only to impactful audiovisual media content, but to all media users, even accounts with a very limited reach. So this is a problem of legality because there's the Digital Services Act and the Audiovisual Media Services Directive allow for intervention on users on certain types of content, like hate speech, promotion of pornography, or of terrorist content, but not on issues such as disinformation. And for regular users, small users. So it's basically CNA, the National Council of Audiovisual, is overstepping. They're overstepping their mandate, and they are doing so by also making another mistake. They're blocking individual social media posts instead of focusing on coordinated inauthentic behaviors, which again can be discussed whether it's in their mandate or not, but it's just a poorly targeted administrative action. So it does not manage to solve the problem in any ways. As Codruța was explaining yesterday, when they do such research, they focus on larger scale in coordinated inauthentic behaviors. This is what the Romanian authorities, unfortunately, mainly failed to do. There's also the issue of the simple disregard for the rule of law. The beginning of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, the Romanian authorities started to block websites by blocking their domain names. And they did so by basically asking internet service provider to block a list of domain names that were arbitrarily decided by authorities that had no mandate in this area. Of course, they very soon failed. In 3 days, they were blocking a media website, a publication, and the problem with this type of situation is that it's a censorship that is not provided by law and is not proportionate, and it is not applied by an independent body. And that, in our opinion, is problematic. There's another type of very different intervention in the media market in general. In the Romanian case, and I know it's the case in other East European countries as well, we have the issue of media outlets being infiltrated by intelligence services, which is a problem. This is done, we don't know on the basis of which legislation. We know it is not forbidden. We know we've seen some, let's say sometimes we've seen positive consequences in this, because we had some media moguls that were put in jail, and we suspected that there was some intelligence services action behind it. In terms of intelligence services actions in regards to social media content, we currently don't know what they're doing. On one hand, we expect them to do what's in their mandate, which is to fight propaganda by foreign state agents, as it is provided by legislation, by the security legislation. At the same time, it's risky to allow these actions to happen in the absence of clear legislation and clear institutional checks on balances on the activity of the intelligence services. And why are these not good actions, and why we should not, and of course these are only some examples, and we could add more to the list of how we should not save the media from authoritarians, oligarchs, and algorithms. It's not good because it ends up sabotaging public trust in the government, and it backfires on the political choices of the citizens. And it diminishes trust in traditional journalism, and it also sabotages the rule of law. Some solutions were discussed here, like transparency of media ownership and sources of funding, transparency of institutional actions, as I was saying, media education, but it should happen at a structural level. This is a frustration that us as NGOs in Romania have, because we talk about media education, and we have private initiatives on media educations for over 25 years, and we do not see a structural change at the level of the Ministry of Education. Institutional communication was also mentioned here, especially by, I think, Oana Marinescu yesterday. And of course, this is obvious, and of course, access to information. And my colleagues from the Association for Technology and Internet and Expert Forum, two organizations who are working also on Digital Services Act implementation, they recently published a report where they were discussing, in the case of Romania, of the need of having a clear list of competent authorities. I don't know how it is in your countries. I know, for example, Moldova managed to do way better than us in these regards. They have a more clear structure of intervention in cases of disinformation or other threats on social media. In the Romanian case, it's all fuzzy and messy, and we need to have a list of competent authorities. We need to have clear legislation that should also define very thoroughly what means illegal content online. And we need to bring enhanced resources and expertise to the institutions that are involved in the implementation of the DSA, so that we are sure that we have the right balance between the need to moderate content and the need to preserve fundamental rights of citizens, such as the right to freedom of expression, the right to freedom of information, and privacy rights. So that was it. Thank you. And yeah. So I think we should start talking. So if you have questions, especially for Pavel, our star guest here, or comments, of course.
You said something about an AI called Spinoza, and maybe you could share a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is a project that we developed a couple of years ago. We're using an older version of ChatGPT, but it's open source, and it's we worked with French media. It was primarily as a prototype dedicated to the French journalists who work on climate and environmental issues, and basically we filled the database with content from media like AFP, Agence France Presse, national, national, international, trustworthy reports on climate, etc. And with the agreement of the media involved, which is not the case for the usual, AI instruments, and then we tested it, we published a report about it, and now we're trying to kind of have it used more widely by the French media who are the partners. But I think the project is not making great progress right now because we don't have the funding that we had in the beginning. But we believe that the EU should invest into European AI tools, and we hope to achieve that as we advocate to the Commission, in the context of the new long-term budget. It's called multi-annual financial framework of the EU. Yeah, but I can provide you with more information if you're interested on Spinoza. It's called Spinoza because our late Director General, Christophe Deloire, he got the idea when he was in the Netherlands.
I don't mean to say that we're rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, but it seems to me from the previous session and from this one that there's an unusual amount of optimism about what's going on. When I hear you, Diana, with very cogent and commonsensical and smart rebuttals, those all happen in a democratic landscape, but we're not quite there anymore. So, my question is, what are the guerrilla warfare actions that we need to train ourselves in so that we survive what seems to be a very potent wave of control, to say the least. Thank you.
So I hope we are still in a democracy, or in Romania at least. I mean, yes, technically. I don't think we can save Romania, because of course I'm concerned about Romania. I don't think we can save Romania unless we are professional. Mm-hmm. Yes, but anyways, we are obviously under attack. We felt it during the elections, but the question is how much of this attack is coming from inside. And in the Romanian case, we talk about institutional inefficiency. It's very failures, because it's very frustrating for us to see how CNA is incapable, the National Council of Audiovisual is incapable of intervening sufficiently in the audiovisual media. They are not prepared, they are not trained. The most of the expertise it seems not to be even with the intelligence services, or maybe they just don't use that expertise, or they use it badly. This expertise lies mostly with journalists and also with academia experts and NGOs. And also with NGOs. And unless it is possible to take action in a democratic manner. I do believe this strongly. But I think we need to sit down and really want to do it. And that's affecting a lot of dodgy institutional and structural issues, such as political parties funding, lack of transparency, and the fact that we don't have truly independent bodies regulating the media realm.
Sorry, just one sentence to respond to your question. I think we have to quit the logic of just defending journalists, and we have to really attack those who attack journalists. And I mean, we're not going to solve this situation with the algorithms in the short term, but with the politicians who attack journalists and who then trigger online harassment, I think a politician like that should get a defamation complaint every time they do that. But yeah, it costs something, and so we need to find the resources for that. But in Czech Republic, we now have Andrej Babiš as prime minister, who is known for his hostility against journalists. He lost in the past just very recently, actually, he lost two cases where he was attacked by the media he defamed, and he had to apologize. I think he's going to be more careful next time. Yeah, but
Nu mă pricep la microfoane. And maybe it's more of a philosophical question, but I'm curious if because we're talking about hybrid war and cognitive war all the time, and somehow we agree that we are at a degree inside the cognitive war. Do you think we can apply the principles of democracy inside a war mindset?
I do believe that we can. I think we can have things that are prescribed by law. So if you have a clear mandate for the institutions, including for security services, we would have a checks and balances system, let's say, I think you can do it. You think we can't, no?
I think we need to debate this at least, because you were talking about shutting down sites, for example. I think that happened during the COVID.
And also at the beginning of the conflict.
Yes,
but in Ukraine.
Let's say it's the beginning of the Ukrainian war and we shut down the Russian propaganda sites. Is that fine or is that not fine?
I think it is important to make sure, and this is not so difficult, that it is somehow prescribed by law. In the case of the Russian propaganda, we had the decision, I think it was by the Council of Ministers of the European Yes, so it was prescribed by law, and that was a good thing because there's nothing we should not give them the arguments to pretend that they are censored. We should not do that.
To pose as victims.
Exactly. And I think we should ask our Moldavian colleagues because, yeah, but we should ask them how they are doing things and institutionally also. I mean, we all look up at them like they were very efficient during the elections, and they also made sure that somehow they kept the faults. Of course, there will always be faults. It's not about that. There will always be institutional mistakes, but it's just about limiting and about not, giving the other ones arguments against us.
And Koduca, we are having these arguments almost every day in our office. And I think it's fine that yeah, and it's very difficult. I don't have the answer. Sometimes maybe I panic. Yeah, yeah.
So maybe we should.
I think, we just have to apply the basic legal principles like proportionality, legality, transparency. So, you cannot have a government shut down a website. You should have a court to do it, and it can be done fast. You can make, and it has to be possible to appeal the decision, and it must be clear why that particular website was shut down, and that was the most proportional. I mean, the proportional sanction.
I'm thinking how this would have worked when Hitler was bombing England, for example. Really, this is what I'm thinking about. You have some channels that are specifically propaganda coming from Russia, for example, and you know that that's what they are. They're state televisions. They're funded by their government. Do we let them go on air or not?
But we have the decision that Liana was referring to. It was validated by...
Exactly.
We actually did criticize it, but it was validated by the
Why?
Court of Justice of the EU, so it was legal. I mean...
I think for us as freedom of the press activists, freedom of expression activists, we are very careful in our long-term experience about the fact that we need to defend the principles, no matter who's at stake. Of course, it's difficult to defend the principles when you talk about an institution as Russia today, so I prefer to have a state that is making sure that is taking the steps that are prescribed by law and proportionate, and as we said. So
yeah, I just wanted to ask something because I'm a bit interested in this situation that you brought up, the difference between a court and the state shutting down a website, right, for whatever reason. First of all, I understand the principle, but at the same time, I think that, at least in our case, the average Romanian probably doesn't understand the difference between the government or a court shutting down a website. And I wonder if, do you believe that there are still some associated risks with this? Because we already have examples in Romania where, especially during the COVID pandemic, where there were websites that were shut down temporarily because of the huge amount of propaganda and fake news they were propagating. I think probably many people here remember the situation with Orthodox Info, which is still... My problem with the entire situation was that the website was, this particular extremist website, Orthodox Info, was shut down over their publishing of fake news in the pandemic. The problem is that it was a legal process. It was done fairly, and then eventually they were allowed to go back online. Now that website is going stronger than ever, and they've been victimizing themselves ever since they got shut down. Right now, it doesn't feel like shutting them down temporarily when going by this fair legal process. It doesn't feel like it had any positive outcome. And I think this goes into what we were talking about earlier, about how do we make sure that we don't give them enough ammunition to victimize themselves, That's my real concern here. How do you fight the public perception that you are censoring these people? Beyond the legal battle, of course. I'm talking more about the fight over people's perception of this. Because to me, it feels like in some situations, we just look like the state, I mean, looks like they're censoring, they're using censorship as a weapon in the eyes of the people. And it doesn't feel like the positive outcomes are good enough to justify these risks sometimes.
I think beyond proper legislation and independent institutions, independent and competent institutions to apply the legislation, we need excellent communication from the authorities, from the government, to explain the decisions, whether they are taken by courts or by independent or what should be independent bodies. And the Romanian state has failed now, and as it has almost always failed in properly communicating its decisions, its legislation to the society. And this has been one of the main fuels for the distrust that is actually undermining the democratic process in a way.
I would just add to this that I think all this disinformation spreads on the social networks, right? I mean, people wouldn't know about this website if it weren't for Facebook, probably, or some other social network. So this is why we advocate for different regulation of the platforms. I mean, you will never solve the systemic problem of disinformation if we don't regulate the digital platforms more. And just one last thing, I mean, if you take a decision about shutting down a website by a government without giving a sufficient reason, without a legally sound reasons, I mean, you just hand press freedom and freedom of expression on a golden plate to an authoritarian, and when he or she comes to power, he will say, "Oh, well, I'm just acting the same way. This is the same process that my predecessor." So, I mean, yeah. And besides, I think the fact that people trust this information is that they have distrust in institutions. You will not solve things just by censoring this information. It's a more profound problem. I didn't say we are censoring it right now.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that we are censoring them, because I don't find what happened to Orthodox Info to be censorship. I think it was a very fair process, but I am afraid that a lot of the people looking at these situations don't see it that way, and that's my worry.
If I'm allowed to give a part of the answer, for some people, regardless of the explanation you will give, they won't believe it because they want to believe this information. So no matter what the state would say, they'll still believe it's about censorship, and that's the sad reality. I would like to address a question to Pavel, and not only to him, about an issue that it's concerning us a lot. We are an independent newsroom, and we are facing a big problem. We have politicians, and not only politicians, corrupt people threatening us with lawsuits if we do not unpublish certain articles. They are invoking GDPR, the right to be forgotten, etc. We are not the only newsroom in this situation. There are plenty of them. And the issue we are confronting is that if we are refusing to do this, we will have lawsuits. For a small independent redaction to pay lawyers in several lawsuits will mean closing the doors, because we cannot afford to have so many lawsuits. Lawyers cost a lot. We have also lawsuits with a giant of mass media, somebody who built up a media empire. And how do you solve it in your country? Is that institution who is, or a founder or NGO who is helping with legal assistance, with lawyers, because, as I said, if we will have 10 lawsuits in line, we go home, all of us.
Yeah, I think one way to deal with this is for every state to transpose the directive of against abusive lawsuits, known as SLAPS. Actually, the deadline will expire in May this year, and however, this EU directive unfortunately concerns only cross-border cases. So when you have a someone suing a media in a different country. So this is like a minimal of cases, but still, it in this legislative process it could be extended to national cases, which is what the European Commission has recommended. Unfortunately, it's not binding. And most states actually are late in transposing this legislation or applying these recommendations. But there are in some states there are already these safeguards. For example, in Czech Republic, when you want to sue someone for defamation and ask for damages, you have to pay to a deposit at the court the amount of money that you are asking for, and actually it has quite a dissuasive effect on SLAPS. Also, what the Commission recommended is for courts to dismiss very early the complaint, so there is no trial and you have to go for years until you have a favorable verdict, and also to sanction those who file these SLAPS. Yeah, I know it's difficult to achieve this change of legislation in Romania, probably, but yes, we do have some limited funds in helping with the costs of journalists. We cannot do it everywhere for every case. There are also other organizations that do it. I think it's also important for journalists to inform about these cases very early on. So from the very point when you get the pre-litigation letter, for example. But yeah, I don't have a miracle solution.
Romania has this legislation now in the parliament, the transposition of the SLAP strategic litigation against public participation directive. So it is in the parliament, and the directive will be hopefully extended to national, the directive provisions will be extended to national cases as well. So those guarantees that you were talking about, some of them at least will be in the legislation. They will not affect your case because they will work only from the moment of the adoption of the legislation. In terms of SLAPS in Romania, we at ActiveWatch, we just published last week a report on SLAPS and freedom of expression, and we looked at symbolic cases, let's say, in the past 5 years in terms of SLAPS, and there are some spectacular cases. We have a case where an independent journalism platform is asked for almost 3.5 million euros from a businessman. And we have other problematic cases where public interest in, articles were removed by court cases from the internet. And this is happening because even if Romania is not, the jurisprudence is not that bad in terms of judging freedom of expression cases or media freedom cases, we do apply Article 10. Still, there are problematic, we still have problems. And of course, one advice that we give to journalists in this report, by looking at these cases and at what's going on with the number of cases rising, is that all newsrooms should have a small amount of money put aside for such cases. We should, and also is valid for NGOs. We have many NGOs being sued and pursued in court. We have NGOs that are asked, I don't know, 2 million euros by a real estate platform. agency, sorry, and so I think we should prepare for these cases. I think our colleagues in the Western media, they have this good practice of in the newsrooms of and they can explain to us. I mean, I think it's kind of a calculated risk, right? You work with lawyers ongoing. You also have always this thing in mind that you might be sued, and especially if you're working in the UK, you might be sued really badly, and it will really cost you loads of money. And there are Loredana, but there's RSF and there's other NGOs, media freedom NGOs in Europe that are providing funds for this, and actually they did support a lot of journalists and NGOs in Romania.
And Loredana, one solution would be, I know it's almost utopic in Romania because it depends on a strong journalist organization working with an insurance company to set up an insurance fund where journalists would pay a prime and you would have a fund that is to be accessed in case of legal suits. That would be an ideal situation, but as we don't have strong professional associations, it's probably difficult to work with an insurance company. But I see this as a pragmatic. I know what it means. Even 1,000 euros for a lawyer, it's.
Per hour of their lawyers. So the little amount to cover the lawsuits when you are sued by a powerful businessman or I don't know, media oligarchs, it's a huge amount of money if they win, of course, if they win.
Let's not forget that our current president has been and is a victim of slaps, and he is still going to courts as a president, as a private citizen, being a president, to defend himself for the cases that were opened against him and his association by real estate developers a few years ago.
Yeah, it's not only a matter of money. I'm asking because if there would be a solution, it would give us more freedom because it's not only us, and we arrive at self-censorship. Because now, if we are about to publish an article, we are thinking 10 times, what if he will sue us? Can we afford a new lawsuit? Can we afford a lawyer? And most of the cases, the answer is no. So it's cutting out our freedom, the fact that there is no trust, I don't know, some common money for the publications that are confronting with such situation. It's a self-censorship, finally.
Because this is the role of the slaps, to intimidate in order to prevent you from publishing.
Yes, I know very well. Thank you.
So at the beginning of the panel, there was a mention of the protection and risks that journalists face, and I would like to draw and to shift the discussion a bit towards the particular issues that women journalists are facing and dealing with. We had throughout time, for example, in Daphne Caruana Galizia's case, her family, particularly her sons, advocated for her case to be solved. In what we've seen in the recent months with Emilia Șercan's defamation campaign and smearing campaign, there was social mobilization also from behalf of the profession. And I think this shows a trend about the gender cost when it comes to resilience in the profession. My question would be, how can we move on from this era where a woman's safety is entirely dependent on, for example, social mobilization, personal strength, and we have no systemic support for them?
Yeah, you're right. We recently published analysis of deep fakes. So these fake video or audio recordings aiming to discredit journalists or use their image for fraud. and out of the 100 cases that we investigated, 75 were targeting female journalists. I think that, and also we as an organization in the last years, we have actually funded more psychological support. I think that's very important as a, as a response to harassment. I think we need more preventive measures, and it's really up to the newsrooms to put in place processes that protect female journalists more, or that they are sure to have someone to refer to when they are harassed. And also, I think it's very important for politicians to speak up when journalists are attacked. So those who believe they are Democrats, to defend journalists, because often this harassment of women and but also men journalists, it's triggered by political attacks. So we need a response from the other side.
I'm also thinking that one solution would be, maybe Liana would disagree, legislative intervention following Moldova's legislation, in which some civil or criminal offenses might have I don't know exactly the English term, a harsher punishment if it's committed against a journalist and or a woman journalist. I think this would have a discouraging effect because it would offer a legal extra protection.
Liana, earlier you were talking about, I wasn't quite clear whether it's prospective legislation that has been proposed to the government to enforce some form of licensing of people who are sourcing news stories. Is that just proposed legislation, or is it already in existence, or is it just a hope for the future?
No, it's in the audiovisual legislation. If you're broadcasting online, you have to go through a similar licensing process. You are not like competing for a license, but you have to submit paperwork to the National Council of Audiovisual before you start broadcasting. And we find this to be excessive and unnecessary. Obviously, we support the idea that CNA should be informed and know very well who are the media service providers under their jurisdiction, and these media service providers should either notify the council or be identified by the council. Just now we are so this legislation basically is abusive in our opinion, because it's asking you to do it beforehand, and they already just last week, I think they or this week they issued a warning to such one such media that was not notifying beforehand. And yeah, we will see how it will play out. It's
and Liana,
yeah, notifying after the broadcasting. We already have media service providers that are broadcasting online, and yes, I think they should notify the council, or the council identify them, but not necessarily using fines against them or warnings, but only if it's really necessary, but not beforehand. And it's a very it's a bureaucratic process where you have to submit a lot of paperwork, including your programs, your scheduling, as if you're applying for a normal license, a frequency, a terrestrial frequency. Say again, sorry. I don't know. I mean, the council should work better. They failed working better on the traditional television, the television that is broadcast through cable or through antenna. So they failed there, and now they're very. There's a frenzy about intervening in the online area, believing that there is how they're going to solve the problem, but they are not very efficient. They're not looking at the size of the media service providers that they should regulate. They are trying to do this. They still don't have clear regulations in this regard. So they end up spending a lot of time regulating very small, insignificant content, unfortunately. Not addressing, okay, they don't really have legislation, but they could address the issue of coordinated.
Oh, it is true that they are overwhelmed, they are understaffed, they are under budgeted, and which makes it even irrational, this decision to. Oh yes, oh yes. They lack the technological instruments and the software and the people. They lack from their scheme of staff. They lack 35 at least personnel, and under the current austerity measures, there's little hope. Yeah, so it's and that's why I don't understand why we don't understand why they adopt such a measure which doesn't help much, but it overwhelms
It's
them.
a long. It's 4 years ago. It's because of video on demand regulations. So basically, they consider online to be also video on demand, of course. So it's difficult for them to, yeah. It was not really like the most problematic thing in the Romanian legislation. It was just a clear example that I could give. That's all.
So one question I have on this, I've made a lot of podcasts with making no money. In fact, the title of my podcast was Nonprofit and had some other words on it. If it's a podcast that has 100 viewers, 500 viewers, is there any scope on this? Because I mean, in my mind, it makes sense beyond, if you have 1 million viewers, I don't know, some point you're huge, then yes, I understand it. If it's reaching, your family, a few friends, it seems obsessive. So is there anything about the scope, like how many people it's reaching before it becomes a legal issue, or that you are requesting money, so you're actually essentially a business? Is there any differentiation on that?
They are working on this legislation, and they almost adopted it. I don't know the exact provisions of this legislation, because I must tell you that we are so tired of attempting to send amendments to the CNA legislation for years that we work closely with the Association for Technology and Internet on this, and we also told the CNA that they should look at the size of the audience. I know that they are looking at the size of the audience. I don't know which is the threshold that they've established. They're also looking at whether it is producing income or not. But that is a very large thing, because if you get advertising on YouTube, you're producing income, no? So, or if you are an NGO and you have donations, again, you are producing income. So, yeah. So they are looking at this. In practice, unfortunately, what they're doing now is that they are applying audiovisual legislation to anonymous users on the internet. So I didn't want to go into all these details, but the problem is that they take a social media post that was notified to them, and instead of notifying directly, somehow let's say they could have a person who could, okay, it's not very proper, let's say, but they could have a person who would notify the platform on that content. because by the rules of the platform, it could be taken down or it could be slowed down or whatever. Codruța knows the rules better than me. And instead of that, they write a transcript of the whole video that user Vladimir Putin 211X is talking about, I don't know. And so they describe the video. So they have someone who's basically sitting and transcribing the video. And then of course, when you're describing a video, is even more problematic. And then they discuss in their meetings. They have 3 meetings per week, and they discuss that video and they decide it should be taken down. And they consider that account Vladimir Putin they consider it to be a media service provider. In the beginning, they were saying this in the decisions after we criticized them together with our colleagues from APTI, from the Association for Technology and Internet. They put that aside, so they don't say anymore that. But they say that this is infringing because they cannot act on disinformation, according to DSA. They say it is infringing audiovisual legislation because it's not is not impartial and balanced and whatever. And sometimes, in some cases, it's not even disinformation. It's just irrelevant content. It's not. Sometimes it's important. It's content that should be removed because it can be very dangerous. Content talking about, I don't know, the fact that Romania is putting together an army and goes to war or stuff like that. So yeah, so that's the situation.
Is it? Yeah, it's on. I'm thinking out loud. Just bear with me 1 minute because I think it's a little bit connected to what Codruța said earlier. At least have the debate on it. Is it worth it? Is it censorship? Is it not? To what Loredana mentioned, protecting ourselves, yes or no? SLAP, guys, where you are involved, us as well as an organization, going to the parliament, change the legislation, etc., etc. It all comes down together for me somehow, getting a little bit of a topic and a conclusion that I can take with back to Bucharest and think about a professional body of journalists. There have been several discussions, tries in Romania, associations, etc. If they exist, who is actually the voice of the journalist? I think at some point, when you come to the table and say, we ourselves as professionals, as journalists have decided that it's clearly not censorship, it's probably a lot better than the government deciding upon it and what gets to be taken down from the internet, from the radio, whatever it is. But I think that's lacking. You guys doing an enormous job, and it's CJI and all the others, but I think we lack, I'll hand it over to you. I think it lacks a strong association of journalists in Romania. This has been lacking for the past 30 years. I don't know the reasons, but I'm taking this with us. And if the ratio guys, and I use the moment just for thank everybody for the partnership here. But maybe for next year we could, as CAST, somehow help in this sort of debate or whatever. If it's worth it, address us, and I urge you to get in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mihai. But the good news is that Codruța is here. There's a new association, and it was actually born here, so she should tell us about it.
So, starting this month, we do have a journalist association. It's called Alianța a Patra Putere. It's registered. We just got a grant from FEDESC for the next 2.5 years. So we just met the past weekend, the first 20 members or such, and decided the directions, and we're just starting to work. So we have one. Thank you.
So I think we can finish with this good news. Looking forward. And so thank you very much for your attention. And please don't leave, because in 3 minutes, Dan Perry, who couldn't connect earlier, will connect. Thank you. And I want to thank Rachu Forum for the invitation and for hosting us.